So with the Necrons finally getting their Geomancer kill team rules, they seem to have got not one, not two, but 3 different datasheets that can all run around separately on the board if they want to. Let's talk about what the Canoptek circle can do on the board. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Necrons, and in this video I thought we'd focus on the new datasheet rules for the kill team Canoptek circle. These guys are a fun little retinue that were originally unveiled at Games Workshop's big summer preview. They came out in Kill Team Tomb World, though for some reason their datasheets took a while to phase into reality after that, only having been released by Games Workshop this past Wednesday. Kill Team Tomb World sold out very fast, so currently they're waiting for an individual release. They should be dropping on the same weekend that the Space Wolves and Tau box set come out, hopefully sometime within the next month or two. Weirdly enough, they're not the first Necron Cryptek focused kill team. Previously we had the Hierotek Circle, a Technomancer plus an Immortals and Deathmark kit, and then an upgrade sprue for a couple of Macrocytes, plus making one into a junior Cryptek. This new one though got a kill team with an entirely new sprue. Rather than just being one of the Crypteks that we already had, it was a Geomancer at the heart of this one. They're a subcategory of Cryptek that we hadn't got a new model for yet, though they've had lore dating back a while. They can do a number of different things, though it sounds like from the lore of the box set, they often do as the name would suggest, and specialise in maintaining the groundwork and the integrity of their tomb complexes, often keeping awake while their brother Necrons sleep. In the past they've often been armed with a tremor stave that can create fissures and undermine the foe, and apparently this one's a female Necron, not that you'd particularly recognise it from the miniature. The miniature itself being really quite a fun one I think, hovering around a sort of Blackstone Menhir type thing, kind of reminiscent of the Silent King, with a snaking and centipede-like body. Beyond the Geomancer, she gets a little retinue of 5 Macrocytes and 2 Tomb Crawlers, smaller subordinate Canoptek creations. The Macrocytes like big plasmacytes that you might have seen on the Scorpek destroyers. The Tomb Crawlers being sort of medium-sized things, significantly chunkier, one with a Gauss weapon and one with a transdimensional weapon. Price-wise, they're probably likely to be around £42 or €65 when they go out. For their rules, I was probably expecting them to have 2 datasheets that could have just been one. I was guessing that potentially the Cryptek might be able to go its own way, and then the retinue will be a choice beyond that. So the 2 could go their own way if they want to, but in a slight surprise they got 3 different ones, one for the Geomancer, one for the Macrocytes, and one for the Tomb Crawlers. And at first impressions it feels like they might actually be better just going their 3 separate ways if you did want to include one in an army, as opposed to massing them up into one unit. Initially when Games Workshop released them, for some reason they came out on the app before their main download page, though they seem to have rectified that now, and you can find their datasheets in the Necron faction pack. Let's talk through all 3, starting with the Geomancer, then going through to the Macrocytes, and then the Tomb Crawlers. Let's start with the central character in the team though, the Geomancer. As you can see now with the bright and shiny new datasheet in the Necron faction pack, in game the Geomancer costs 75 points to field on the table. It can attach to either the Canoptek Macrocytes, the Immortals or Necron Warriors, fairly similar to the other specialists supporting Crypteks there, but add in the Macrocytes as a unique retinue. Statline wise, they can move a bit faster than most with an 8-inch move due to that centipede body I guess, and then has 4 wounds at toughness 4 with a 4+ save. Not really all that hard to kill if you can get damage on them. None of the keywords are really all that unexpected, an infantry character and a Cryptek. And for those attachment options you do just get the small bonus rule that if you go with the Macrocytes, the Geomancer doesn't ruin their scout move and you can still scout 8 inches up the board with them. Bar the Plasmancer, the actual damage output doesn't really tend to be the main draw for Crypteks, and even then he's a bit more of a mix between damage output and buffs. The weapon that they're armed with is the Tremor Glaive. It's got 2 different shooting profiles at range, 2 shots to 18 inches with strength 8, AP 2 and damage 2, though interestingly enough melter 2 as well, so damage 4 if you get within 9, and then a small torrent attack, a fairly long range and a flamer style profile with a couple of extra hits, d6 plus 2 hits at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1 with ignores cover. Either way you're likely to chip in a bit against some enemy units, but not really be wiping out squads in their own right with this. In melee there's just 2 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 2, maybe likely to off the odd Space Marine if you're rolling well. Finally though, it feels like the real attraction to the Geomancer are the supporting rules, and they sort of want to pull you in different directions really. One slowing down enemy infantry on the front lines, the other denying deep strike. Tectonic Reverberations is one of the movement debuff style rules. In your movement phase at any point, you select one enemy that's within 18 inches and visible to the Geomancer, and until the start of the next movement phase that unit is pinned. While pinned it's -2 to move and -2 to charge rolls. Then the second special rule is an obelisk control node. While the models within range of an objective marker that you control, enemy units that are set up on the battlefield from reserves can't be set up within 12 inches. That's an interesting rule, and it will have effect against 6-inch deep strikers. Those may be a little bit less flexible than certain other units that you might get elsewhere that don't have to be on a friendly objective. Overall, between that, the rules seem interesting, but quite a high price tag at 75 points if they are the main attraction. I don't really feel like the Geomancer does much beyond that. Its damage and defense for the points just really aren't strong at all. Unlike literally all the other Crypteks, it doesn't have any sort of buff for its unit itself, so any sort of big warriors like the Warriors and the Immortals aren't really going to want a Geomancer versus one of the many other good Crypteks out there. And I would probably argue that the Macrocytes just aren't really a great bodyguard either. They're super flimsy and easy to gun down. For getting the most out of the debuffs though, the -2 to move and charge can genuinely be meaningful in some matchups. If you can get line of sight against an enemy unit that really wants to be moving up to charge you next turn, it could make the difference between whether they get in or not, and that could be a really big deal, potentially saving an entire unit. If you got line of sight on an enemy unit that wanted to charge you and they'd normally move 6 inches, their average charge threat range including engagement range would be 14 inches. If the Geomancer hits them with a debuff, that drops down to around about 10. Obviously it is going to be kind of random and they could still roll super high, but there's a pretty reasonable chance that you could leave a unit floundering. For faster units you might not be able to keep them out of range though. For say a 12-inch moving jump troop unit, it becomes 16 inches average charge threat, so a pretty reasonable chance to make their way into the Geomancer themselves. Never mind if there's anything closer. It would be a bit more useful if you either didn't need line of sight or you had a longer range on it. Otherwise, for the 12-inch deep strike for 75 points, it's not bad to have, though perhaps a bit inflexible that it actually has to be on an objective marker. That's often where you might want it, but sometimes it might be better to put it in a battlefield corner or something. It is on the Geomancer's big 50mm base, which does help a bit. It goes a bit further than on a small based character, so I feel like if you're using it for that role, it's not really worth buying a retinue for them, and you're probably going to be camping out on the home objective as opposed to being brave and pushing up to the mid-board, where if so you might be better off with a unit to buff the damage or defense of a retinue. If the enemy has any indirect fire, they could take it out fairly easily. If you're in Awakened Dynasty, you might be able to revive the Geomancer for a command point, but there's a good chance you might want that for other characters. I can't help but feel it just feels a bit borderline for the 12-inch deep strike denial thing. Say if you just wanted to screen out the backfield, you could get 10 warriors for 90 points. I'm not saying that's necessarily a great use of them or anything like that, but they can cover a fairly wide area and might be able to zone out a similar sort of amount of table, even if they won't be quite so absolutely protected against deep strike charges as a lone Geomancer might be. Overall, between all that, it's two interesting rules, though it feels like a bit of a high-end competitive play tech piece that some people might enjoy, but many just wouldn't really get much value from. My instinct is that 75 points just feels like a bit too much, unless you think it fits in really well with your plans, and I suspect that the vast majority of people playing a bit more casually would do better with some more direct damage and defense for those 75 points, rather than paying a big premium to zone out for the 12-inch bubble. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to ObjectiveMarkers.com, the sponsor of today's video, makers of some faction-themed battlefield accessories in the UK that they ship to plenty of places around the world. Their main offering, unsurprisingly, are these objective markers, the idea being that you've got a 40mm marker to represent a 40k objective in the middle. Then the edge of them has a 3-inch zone of control, so you can super easily see whether or not your units are within range or not, literally at a glance. Their particular designs are printed on thin flexible silicon, which is quite nice as you can see the actual battlefield terrain under it, but still adding a bit of theme such as this, or very alien and perhaps a bit Necron one here. Beyond those, they've got plenty of other designs though. They've got the channel merch one, a more faction agnostic one that helps to support the channel with any purchases of that one. Normally their offerings for these are around £30 or $42 for 6. I believe shipping is free in the UK and free for bigger orders elsewhere. They do have a lot of other different designs, ones for Chaos, Greenskins, and of course our favourite robot skeletons, plus a whole bunch of other ones including their new designs for Space Elves and various other flavours of Power Armour and Xenos. Beyond that, they also sell a few ruined terrain bases if you want some footprints marked out for them. Thanks for them for sponsoring this one, and if you want to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description. Let's get on to the next of the 3 Necron datasheets though, in the Canoptek Macrocytes. These guys form the main base retinue for the squad, though I must admit are surprisingly expensive for their profile and what they do. 85 points for 5 of them. I would have guessed them to be a fair bit less than this. These guys are beasts with the fly and unsurprisingly the Canoptek keyword, so able to interact with terrain well and get around the board rather easily. They move 8 inches, so a little bit faster than some Necrons out there. They'll have really quite fragile defensive profiles for the points cost, 17 points per model for just 1 wound at toughness 3 with a 4+ save, which is kind of abysmal on the defensive front. Small arms are going to destroy these guys in short order, and even anti-tank weapons aren't going to be desperately inefficient firing at them when they cost this many points per model. Basically, if they're ever put in the open, they're probably going to die very quickly. For moving up the board, they have scouts 8 inches, so they can get into the midfield, though what they're going to be bringing is support things as opposed to much damage and defense, and that could give them some kind of mixed priorities as they don't really want to be on the front line actually getting attacked. For their weapons, they have a tiny bit of slightly inaccurate damage. Each Macrocyte can take a Gauss Scalpel or Tesla Caster. They both shoot one shot to 18 inches. The Gauss is strength 4, AP -1, and lethal hits. The Tesla Caster strength 5, AP 0. Sustained hits 1, but also gets the assault keyword. I feel like maybe the Tesla Caster might be the way to go with those, just so they can really happily advance around the table and not have mixed priorities there. If they get into melee, they have a few melee attacks, 2 attacks apiece that's strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1, and between those profiles they'll stack a few saves on light infantry, but they don't really have all that much threat. They're not even going to do significant damage to something like a squad of guardsmen. Between shooting and melee you might kill 5 or so. For upgrades, the only boosted damage profile they get is the Atomizer Beam. This one's likely to be taken due to the upgrade that it's paired with, and gets you a single shot at strength 6, AP 1 and damage 1, so a bit more strength but only 12-inch range. With the damage and defense absolutely awful for their points cost, taking them in any sort of strong Necrons army kind of needs to be justified by their special rules, and rather than having one big one, they have 3 small ones. Harassment Swarm gives them an aura that enemy units besides monsters and vehicles are -1 to hit. That applies at range and melee, though if the opponent really wants to avoid them at range, they might just be able to back off a bit. And given that's only got a 3-inch range or so, they have to be incredibly close to something meaningful to actually make that happen, and put those very easy to kill bodies right on the front line. If they're charged by something that isn't a monster or vehicle though, it would make them effectively -1 to hit in close combat. Then one of them can swap out its gun for an Accelerator Mandible. That one's well worth doing as it can give a meaningful buff to a friendly Canoptek unit, making it weapon skill 1 better in the fight phase, and the best place to use that would normally be Wraiths. With that on the go, you could have Wraiths hitting on a 3+ base, so in things like Awakened or Star Shatter they could be hitting on a 2+ with a +1 to hit modifier, and that genuinely is something meaningful. They will be hitting that bit harder. Again though, that's going to be a buff that's really quite hard to coordinate. They have to be within 3 inches of the Canoptek unit actually in the fight phase, and that might not be too easy to do. Say if the Wraiths had been charging off and had to make a long charge on something, they might just pull themselves right out of range. It would have been a far more interesting buff I think if you could have handed out in the command phase or the movement phase sometime. That way at least you could accelerate the Wraiths before they go charging off into something. Then finally the third special rule is a Nanoscarab Projector. Once per battle round, when a friendly Necrons unit within 3 inches activates reanimation protocols, you can use this ability and that target recovers 1 additional wound. I feel like literally any buff that improves reanimation protocols, even in a pretty minor way like this, is interesting enough, but at only 1 wound per battle round that can't stack with multiple reanimations, it's a bit limited value, to the point where if you were just using this unit to buff reanimation protocols, you probably would have just been better off buying more copies of that unit that you wanted to reanimate in the first place. Overall, I feel like a unit with some interesting rules, but are just kind of frustrating, and it seems like it'd be hard to use all of those at once. As mentioned, their damage and defense are both really bad for the points cost, but I guess if you can get some utility out of the rest of them, then that could be a small side benefit. It feels like on paper, if you want to use them, it's probably with Wraiths and perhaps in the Canoptek Court, given the rerolls and things. The most powerful buff feels like the +1 weapon skill to the Wraith, but I'm not sure it's necessarily worth 85 points to do that. If they can support the Wraiths and move up into combat, you could make them -1 to hit as well by having these guys nearby. That's also good value, but feels like you'd be struggling to keep them hidden if the Wraiths are charging something and these guys are coming alongside. The enemy's probably going to be able to get a line of sight on them and gun them down very easily next turn. The reanimation certainly isn't nothing either, but only helps a small bit to the point where I'm not sure it would necessarily be worth repositioning the unit to help with that. Basically, if you could keep them absolutely hidden in a ground floor ruin and still manage to support Wraiths that are fighting in melee with that, between all the special rules they might have enough there. So I think realistically, just for the positioning problems that they have, they don't really justify an 85 point cost. I feel like they probably should have been significantly cheaper really. Maybe somewhere in the sort of 65 to 70 points sort of ratio might be more tempting, and perhaps not even that. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts though. I've seen some people genuinely quite interested to run these guys, though I'm struggling to see it myself. Finally, on what seems at first impressions probably the best datasheet of the lot are the Tomb Crawlers, and these guys are 50 points for 2 sort of small to medium Canoptek constructs with some Gauss Reapers on top. The way that these work is that they're basically an alternative for Cryptothralls, so you have 2 of them as a sort of mini retinue for a Cryptek, and they can attach into a bigger squad alongside them. You can't have both these guys and Cryptothralls in the same unit or multiple copies of them, so it is one or the other. For their keywords, they have Beasts and Canoptek, and for their stat line they're fairly sturdy, 3 wounds at toughness 4 with a 3+ save and a 5-inch move. basically the same sort of stat line as the Cryptothralls, so they really do seem to be rivals for that sort of Cryptek guard role, and you can compare them really quite directly. For their weapons, their damage output isn't really too much to write home about. One gets to upgrade to a transdimensional isolator, so you basically take that one and then one twin Gauss Reaper. The isolator just has 2 shots at strength 4, AP 2 and damage 2, so it might occasionally fry a Space Marine or something. The twin Gauss Reaper is just the same as the warrior profile, but with twin linked. Perhaps surprisingly given their appearance, they're more threat in melee than they are at range. 4 attacks at strength 6, AP 1 and damage 1. Still not exactly great for 50 points, but might be able to claw down a few light infantry. Then finally they have their special rule called Weapon Sentinels. Each time a model in this unit makes a ranged attack within 12 inches, you can ignore any modifiers to the attack's ballistic skill, hit roll or wound roll. It doesn't really matter too much about their firepower as they don't have very much, but what's interesting is that confers to the unit that they're in as well, and that could be really quite a big and meaningful squad. If you had 20 warriors with Gauss Reapers attacking an enemy unit, then they wouldn't be -1 to hit or wound if the opponent had stealth or another rule. Weirdly enough, despite a slightly unassuming profile without big damage output, they might still be the single strongest element of the box set. It's just basically because they compare quite so well to Cryptothralls. They do exactly the same job, but fairly directly better, and Cryptothralls, after going out of fashion for a bit, are right back in favour in competitive lists again. Lots of Necron lists that do well in top tournaments do take some along, and they generally do so to make a big Necron unit just that bit bulkier, adding them on to some Canoptek Wraiths or a big warrior block, and their extra ablative wounds that your opponent would have to fire yet more stuff into that squad to try and take it down to the point where it can't reanimate and ping back a lot of its health. Compared with the Cryptothralls, they're fairly directly better than them. They cost 10 points less for the exact same defensive stats, which are the really important bit really. They are a bit slower and might slow down their units, which could be an issue for the Wraiths, but that doesn't seem to stop people using them, and you can chain out the unit a bit if you want to make some charges. Between their shooting output and melee, they've got some slightly better damage output. They don't get the fights on death that the Cryptothralls have though, which is one advantage, and they don't give the Cryptek a feel no pain, which admittedly isn't the worst side benefit in the world, for a bit of insurance to stop them getting sniped out of a unit with precision. It's also interesting that they have an actual okay buff with the ignores modifiers against shooting. Not really quite so impactful against Wraiths, even if they do have a little bit of firepower, but in a big warrior block with a whole bunch of Gauss Reapers, it seems alright. Then finally, as a thing that I guess Games Workshop might not really have been intending, they have the Canoptek keyword, and it means that if you had these guys alongside a Cryptek in a squad of either warriors or immortals, that means that you can get the Canoptek keyword into the unit and access a whole bunch more stratagems for Canoptek Court. The unit will already have a Cryptek in it, so you can already get the rerolls, and you'll still unfortunately be locked out of that devastating wound stratagem for models that aren't either Cryptek or Canoptek models, but it does allow you to use a few more stratagems on them. You'll be able to get a 6-inch reactive move on those units when the enemy moves close, reanimation when charged, which could be a big deal for warriors, or stopping the enemy from shooting the squad out of 18 inches. They're all really quite powerful stratagems, and the inclusion of these guys in Immortals and Warriors can both add a bit more defense and also allow you to access them. Admittedly, Canoptek Court isn't quite as commonly played versus things like Star Shatter or Awakened Dynasty at the moment, but the existence of these guys, unless they change them somehow, looks like it might make them better. Perhaps one of the strangest things about them, though, is that they don't seem to be particularly good with those Canoptek Macrocytes, as Macrocytes have Scout, but these guys do not. Seems like a bit of a curious decision here, and it really seems like actually fielding the Geomancer in the Macrocyte unit with these guys attached just seems like you're going to cluster together a very expensive unit with a lot of utility that will do very little indeed. The amount of anti-synergy between them seems to be really quite fearsome. In any case though, let me know your thoughts as to the new units. At first impressions, they all feel like they have interesting rules, though I think for the points at the moment, it feels like the Geomancer and the Macrocytes are paying too much for their abilities, at least when taken as a whole and relative to other Necron units, though the Tomb Crawlers just seem like they could be a very tempting option for an alternative to Cryptothralls if you don't want the feel no pain on your Cryptek. Let me know your thoughts for the datasheet though. Will you be tempted to put a Geomancer in your army list? I look forward to hearing your takes down in the comments below. Thanks to Objective Markers for sponsoring the video. If you'd like to take a look over their site and their faction-specific battlefield accessories, then check them out, links down in the video description. A big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. If you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep up with Games Workshop's news and releases. I do tend to have new videos coming out most days. If you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.